Claude Massop, the name of the man who made his unforgettable mark in the 1960s and 70s during the political turmoil that permeated mainly Kingston and St. Andrew, Jamaica.
Welcome to Ramona TV. Like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Okay.
And Industrial Terrace, Kingston. So this was the place of death of Claude Massop. So what exactly happened? It was Sunday, February 4 of 1979, and Claude Massop was returning from a football match in Spanish Town. He was traveling in a taxi cab with three other men. Those three men were 25 years old Trevor Tinson, an air conditioning technician of 14 Tivari Crescent, Kingston 13. 21 years old Lloyd Fraser, a racehorse groom of Tivoli Gardens, and the taxi driver, a man called Samuel Ivan. The taxi was signaled to stop by some police officers, and when it failed to, a chase began. The chase lasted for several minutes and ended at the intersection of Marcus Garvey Drive and Industrial Terrace. With gun Johns, the policemen barked for the occupants of the car to exit. Of course, Claude Massop complied with the other men. They stepped from the car with their hands in the air. While standing beside the taxi cab, Claude Massop exchanged angry words with the policemen. He had argued with police officers before, and so, he was not expecting anything further than just the argument. But those specific policemen had already decided to do the worst. A barrage of bullets were fired, and when the deafening sounds of the guns stopped, the bullet-riddled body of Claude Massop and Trevor Tinson and Lloyd Fraser lay lifeless on the ground. The only survivor from the car was the taxi driver, Samuel Ivan. Why he was not shot, I don't know. But he was arrested, and the police charged him with possession of an illegal firearm. According to the police side of the story, the policemen claimed that Claude Massop pulled a gun as he was leaving the car and hence was shot. But according to eyewitnesses, including that of Samuel Ivan, no such thing happened. But the real truth was to come to light, and we'll look at that later on as we go through the farm. Now, in the second section on the farm, over on the right, it says usual residence of deceased, meaning permanent resident, the place that Claude Massop lived, as his permanent residence. But they wrote nothing there. Well, Claude Massop was living at 23 Shortwood Road, Kingston. So that was his usual residence, 23 Shortwood Road, Kingston. Let's move back over to the left of the farm. On the left side of the farm, we're going to look at his basic information before going back to the right side of the farm to look at the official cause of death. And I must say at this point that the other deceased, Trevor Tinson and Lloyd Fraser, also had farms like this. Farms were filled out. Death registration forms were filled out for them. But I'm looking at Claude Massop. So here on the left side of the form it says particulars of deceased, date of death, and they wrote 4th February 1979. In simpler terms, or more familiar terms, February 4, 1979. Below that, we see full name, and they wrote Claudius Massop. So, though we say Claude Massop, his birth name is Claudius Massop. Below that, I'm gonna skip male. We all know his male. I've always mentioned that in the other videos I do. There's no sense in doing that, right? So let's just move on to the part that it says condition. The form says condition, and condition means marital status. And they wrote married. So yes, Claude Massop was married. I think the name of his wife is Sidonie Massop. The couple had 2 children together. They had 2 children together. And the children were teenagers at the time that Massop died. Alright, continuing down, we see age, and they put 30. Yes, I looked at many pictures of Claude Massop and I said he looked older than 30. I don't know if it's because of the hair, you know, but he was 30. Below that, we see occupation or calling, and they wrote businessman. Yes, indeed, he was a businessman. He was a government contractor. He was a government contractor. But who was he personally? You know, what was he outside of just being a government contractor? Claude Massop, despite the negativity which follows his name, was not a wicked man. No, he was not a wicked man. He had an active conscience and saw the necessity for unity. Probably his most publicly known act of kindness was the One Love Peace concert, which was held on Saturday, April 22 of 1978. The idea for this concert came from a weird or even uncomfortable encounter between Claude Massop and one of his main enemies, a man called Aston Bucky Marshall Thompson. You see, both of them, Claude Massop and Bucky Marshall, both of them were rivals who hated each other. Both men hated each other. Their gangs war against each other. Claude Massop was leader of the Phoenix gang, and he was also strongman in and around West Kingston. Bucky Marshall, on the other hand, was from the PNP. Anyway, it so happened that Bucky Marshall was arrested by the police, and Claude Massop was, in a separate incident, arrested. Both men were locked in the same jail cell. I mean, this was like putting two bulls in one pen, right? With nowhere to run from each other, both men reflected on the enmity between them. And through some means, they began talking to each other. Both Massop and Bucky Marshall came to the mature understanding that the fighting has to stop. Too much bloodshed among the youths coming from gunfights between JLP and PNP factions. After both men were released from jail, they kept the promises between each other. So on Monday, January 9 of 1978, Claude Massop met with Aston Bucky Marshall Thompson, along with some others, and they signed a peace treaty. This photo was taken of them that very same day. The peace treaty was no joke. As you may already know, a peace treaty is an agreement between two hostile parties which formally ends a state of war between the two parties. For the peace treaty to work effectively, Claude Massop and the other parties to the agreement had to have protectors or enforcers of the peace in their respective communities. Because without having enforcers of the peace, just signing a piece of paper is not gonna work. Having protectors or enforcers of the peace in their communities, it ensures that some hotheads did not cause trouble. The first accomplishment of the peace treaty was the end of gunfights between communities that the treaty governs. The second accomplishment was the setup of the Central Peace Council. So it was not just say we want peace and that's it. Claude Massop ensured that they were doing things on the ground that would achieve the peace. So as I was saying, the second accomplishment was the setup of the Central Peace Council, which was formed just days after the signing of the treaty. The focus of the Central Peace Council was to help people living in the area governed by the treaty. These areas include Tivoli Gardens, Rima, Arnett Gardens, and so on. The aim of the Central Peace Council were 1. To keep peace in troubled areas and help develop those troubled areas. 2. To uplift the people of the ghetto areas. 3. To help stop crime. And 4. To help the people live as brothers. The council, through a public statement, called on residents who fled the areas under the treaty, back when there were war. They called on those people to come back home and also build their communities. The Central Peace Council also secured books, uniforms, other school materials for school children. And the council, of course, was supported by donations and by money from both political parties. By donations and by money from both political parties.
Help what?
The third big accomplishment from the peace treaty was the One Love Peace Concert, which was held on Saturday, April 22 of the same year, 1978. The One Love Peace Concert was held at the National Stadium. Claude Massop was part of organizing this concert. Yes, he was very involved in organizing this concert, because remember, the concept of the concert came from him and Bucky Marshall and another name I don't remember at this point. Anyway, Claude Massop, in part of making this peace concert work, using his own money, he flew to London and convinced Bob Marley to come back to Jamaica and perform at the concert. Now, Bob Marley had left Jamaica after an assassination attempt on his life on December 5 of 1976. In fact, Bob Marley called Jamaica a rotten egg, that the country had become a rotten egg. After the attempt on his life, possibly by some JLP supporters, because in 1976, Bob Marley was working close with Michael Manley and was doing some dubs for the PNP party. And he was to meet again with the Prime Minister when someone tried to kill him. Anyway, Bob Marley survived the attempt on his life and he left Jamaica. So in 1978, when this concert was being organized, Claude Massop knew that Bob Marley was a force for peace. He was the superstar of Jamaica at that time. So he flew to London, he met Bob Marley, and he was able to convince Bob Marley to come to Jamaica and do the concert. Bob Marley agreed. About 18 artists performed at the concert, including Leroy Smart, Peter Tosh, Dennis Brown, Junior Tucker, who was just an upcoming artist at the time, The Inner Circle, and Bob Marley himself, who was the main act. almost all the big named artists did something memorable during their performances. For example, Peter Tosh used the opportunity to lyrically lecture Prime Minister Manley and the police on equal rights and justice, and for marijuana to be legalized. The most memorable act, though, was that of Bob Marley. When Bob Marley called both Edward Seaga and Michael Manley on the stage, and in a symbolic act of peace, Bob Marley let them shake hands. This was the most powerful message of peace in the One Love Peace concert. Bob Marley delivered more than expected. This was not planned. It's like Bob Marley went into a trance, and the idea just came to his mind to call the two men at the top, because Claude Massop and all the other area dons, they were below these politicians. So to call the two men at the top, the two presidents of the two major parties, to come on stage and shake hands was one of the most powerful messages that night from the concert. It was a concert to bring about peace among political factions, of course, but it was also a concert to raise money to provide some 10,000 jobs for Jamaican youths. He was happy for the peace that he and his once rivals aimed for. Finally, he must have thought there is peace between the people of Tivoli, Matthews Lane, Arnett Garden, and so on. He must have been looking towards years of peace. You can't see the future, so you believe your present behavior will affect the future based upon your expectation. So Claude Massop, as he was up there on the stage and hugging and laughing and just being positive, he must have felt that peace was finally achieved. But as the Bible says, when you think it is peace and safety, it's sudden destruction. Within months after the One Love Peace concert, the peace began collapsing. Some young hotheads from Arnett Gardens and Tivoli triggered off an uncontrolled war, leaving bodies after bodies and homelessness. Members of the Central Peace Council were exposed for stealing tens of thousands of dollars from donations. Rival gangs of young men rose to the surface with names like Curly Locks, Coley Paul, Bam Bam, and General Starkey. Police killed dozens of wanted men from their lists. Claude Massop himself became a target for assassination. The peace treaty had evaporated. Now let's get back to the farm. Below occupation or calling, we see birthplace. And it is empty. Well, as far as we know, Claude Massop was born in Kingston, and from an early age, he got involved in criminal activities. And during the 1960s, he would rise to the top as an area don. All right, so let's find out now the official cause of his death. So we know he was shot. Before we look at what they wrote on this form, it's important to know that there was an inquest. Yes, an inquest into the death of Claude Massop, Trevor Tinson, and Lloyd Fraser was held in Kingston, 1979. The inquest was presided over by resident magistrate Neville Clark, who was the coroner of Kingston at the time. Now, during the inquest, there were many who gave testimonies and analysis. One of them was Dr. George W. Curtis from the United States. He came to Jamaica. He examined the body of Claude Massop. According to Dr. George W. Curtis, who was a pathologist, he said after examining Claude Massop's body, he discovered that Claude Massop was shot 5 times in the head, 8 times in the chest, 5 times in the neck, and 5 times in the armpit. Dr. George W. Curtis said that Lloyd Fraser was shot 26 times, and Trevor Tinson was shot a total of 56 times. What were those police officers thinking? That was overkill. Because according to one witness, he said that while Claude Massop's body was on the ground, the police were still pumping bullets in it. "26 policemen were involved in the incident. They were called to the inquest. Only 21 of the 26 police officers turned up at the inquest held on Sutton Street in Kingston. So you may say, so what happened to the other 5? Well, it was revealed that 3 of them fled the island and 2 did not show up. So it was 26 of them. When they were summoned to the inquest, only 21 turned up, with 3 of them already fled the island and 2 did not come to the inquest. The 21 that showed up reserved their right not to say anything. They kept silent. The inquest lasted for a total of 10 weeks. 10 weeks. But before looking at the conclusion of the inquest, let's read the official cause of death. And of course, the official cause of death is the conclusion of the inquest. But since we are looking at the death registration form, let's go straight into the official cause of death determined by this inquest. So here on the right side of the form, it says cause of death, immediate cause. Death was due to multiple gunshot wounds, and all 26 policemen who took part in the operation at Marcus Garvey Drive and Industrial Terrace are criminally responsible. Since reading these forms, this is the first time I have seen where they said the police officers are criminally responsible. I'm going to put the text on the screen and let's just read it for one more time. It says, death was due to multiple gunshot wounds. Remember what Dr. George W. Curtis, the pathologist, said. He said that Claude Massop was shot 5 times in the head, 8 times in the chest, 5 times in the neck, and 5 times in the armpit. And that is why it is saying here that death was due to multiple gunshot wounds. And it goes on to say, and all 26 policemen who took part in the operation at Marcus Garvey Drive and Industrial Terrace are criminally responsible. So the inquest concluded, came to an end, and found the police officers involved to be criminally responsible. Yes. So what does that mean when they said they were criminally responsible? It means that their act was a criminal act, and they have to answer to it in court. Warrants were issued for the arrest of 12 policemen. These policemen were Kenneth Bailey, Leslie Samuels, Roy Irvine, Inal Johnson, Leroy Hanson, E. Johnson, Leroy Allison, Javis Punal, Hernell Houston, Errol Plowright, Noel Mackenzie, and Dadrick Henry. All 12 men were arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. So the trial was set, and those who were in support of Claude Massop, his sympathizers, the people who lamented that he was killed in cold blood, all these people started to feel better. Here it is. These police officers were arrested, they were charged for murder. Now they are in court. Well, the matter went to court. The matter lasted for 3 weeks in the St. Thomas Circuit Court. All 12 policemen were freed in the St. Thomas Circuit Court. Yes. After the 3-week trials, not one of them went to jail. They were set free by the jury. With smiles on their faces, the policemen walked free. Anyway, the funeral of Claude Massop was huge. Thousands came out to pay their respect. After the funeral, he was buried in the church cemetery.
Welcome to Ramona TV. Like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Okay?